Plastic surgery is often dismissed as just pure vanity, stupidity, um, artificial, all sorts of things. But I've been a facial plastic surgeon for many years, and that explanation, I promise you, is way too simplistic. And the reason for that is that our appearance is actually not separate from who we are. The face is a very vital part of the interface between our internal world and the outside world. And so I want to share in this video some thoughts about making the case for plastic surgery, not as something that's a vanity thing, but as something that is important for how we see the world and how we interact with it. That wanting to change something about your appearance can actually be rational, healthy, and actually really quite meaningful. So to start about that, let me talk a little bit about the mind-body connection. So we usually think that the mind-body connection works in one way. We feel happy, so we smile. We feel sad, we frown. We feel confident, we carry ourselves differently. But there's so much more to it. It is a lot more important, and because the body actually influences the mind. So there's this really cool study that's talked about in this book that I recently read by Daniel Kahneman. He discusses a famous experiment in thinking. It's in his book called Thinking Fast and Slow, where people hold a pencil in their mouths. So the research goes is that researchers positioned the pencil in ways that activated the facial muscles differently. So in one of the scenarios, they had them hold the pencil in their mouth so that it involved the muscles with smiling. They then evaluated material that they thought was humorous. The original study found that people whose facial muscles were positioned more like a smile rated the material as funnier. People who were holding the pencil in a way to make them frown rated the material as not quite as funny. And this became one of the classic demonstrations of the facial feedback hypothesis. So in simple terms, we don't only smile because we're happy. The physical act of smiling seems to provide some information back to the brain that we are happy. And this has actually had some mixed results in terms of follow-up, but people have found that this can be replicated. More recent research has suggested that facial feedback exists, but it's important in the context. And to me, an interesting point isn't whether holding a pencil makes you 10% happier. It's that the boundary between our physical state and our psychological state isn't as clean as we would be led to believe. So how does that relate to the face? Well, if we think about the face, we know that the face is extraordinarily important psychologically. It's our identity. It's how we recognize ourselves. It's how we recognize other people. It's how we communicate emotion. And other people are constantly interpreting our faces, usually without consciously realizing that they're doing it. Happy, tired, angry, sad, old, young, energetic, tired, whatever, approachable, intimidating. Sometimes the message that our anatomy sends isn't the message we intend to send. And furthermore, it's not only how we communicate to other people, but like the pencil study shows, it's like how we communicate with ourselves. How does our how does our body communicate with our mind? So, something that patients often say is, I just am so tired of looking tired. Or people say that I look tired. So if they've got heavy upper eyelids or lower eyelid bags or the cheeks sagging and they've got something in the neck here, people might ask them, like, are you tired? But they're not tired. They feel fine. Or another one is this is more common for guys like me, like, we've got this heavy brow or whatever. And they say, like, you look angry, but they're not angry. But their anatomy is communicating something. It's communicating emotion that maybe isn't true. It's something like 70% of our communication is nonverbal. That's how it affects things. And other people's perceptions then become part of our own experience. And that's an important thing to realize, is that how other people interact with us affects how we interact with the world and how we interact with them, but also how we interact with the entire world overall. So I think that's an important thing to consider, is how are we interacting with each other, and how does our face kind of play into that role? Because the truth is that, if somebody's got kind of a scowl on this, like if I'm walking around like this, I may feel happy, but I don't look like it. And people may interpret me as being unhappy or being irritable. And then that makes them irritable. And then it's like this cycle where then they kind of treat us differently. So I think that's really important for us to understand in terms of how we interact. And that comes back to why I think plastic surgery is actually a lot more than vanity. Because how we perceive ourselves influences my confidence and my behavior, and my behavior then changes how other people respond to me. And our appearance isn't just operating in isolation, it exists inside a social and a psychological system. So, am I saying that vanity doesn't exist? Well, of course not. Vanity does exist. People can become overly focused on how they look, and that's not healthy. And certainly plastic surgery can be pursued for unhealthy reasons. And these are all reasons that I would tell people not to have surgery, because it doesn't create self-worth. It can't save a marriage, cure depression, make another person love you. Um, it can make an unhappy person, you know, permanently happy, and it won't create perfection. There's always imperfection. But the opposite extreme doesn't make sense either. We shouldn't pretend that appearance doesn't matter. We oftentimes think that we should be in a state where appearance doesn't matter, but it does. We There's a reason we work out. There's a reason we try to eat healthy. There's a reason we treat acne or style our hair, or we wear clothes that we think make us look good. We we do thousands of things to influence how we look and feel, and we don't automatically consider those vain or certainly not pathologically vain. So why is surgically changing something that's bothered somebody for 20, 30 years automatically dismissed as vanity? And there's actually some research about this, because the evidence is a little bit more nuanced than plastic surgery makes people happy. There was a recent systematic review and meta-analysis that found an overall moderate improvement in self-esteem after cosmetic surgery. But those results differed amongst different procedures, and facial procedures themselves had a little bit more of a marginal sort of improvement in terms of how that affects things. There are some other recent reviews that point out that the quality of the psychological outcomes research isn't as strong as we would like, so more research needs to be done. But the bottom line is that it does matter, but also at the same time, like, I'm not going to go say, go get plastic surgery and you'll be happier. That's not the case I'm making. The case I'm making is that appearance is one legitimate component of your well-being, both in terms of psychological and social well-being. And I also think there's a difference when we think about vanity versus agency. Vanity, I would say, is something along the lines of, my value depends on how attractive other people think I am. Whereas kind of more of the agency thing would be, this is my body, this bothers me, I understand the risks, I understand the fact that there's limitations of what I can do, and I just prefer to change it. Those have totally different psychological motivations. Wanting to look good doesn't automatically mean that someone has poor esteem. You can still like yourself and still want to improve something. And this is, why am I talking about this? Well, it's because this is what I hear from patients. And after years of doing this, patients typically don't come to us as surgeons asking for perfection. They don't want to look like someone else or a perfect version of themselves. They actually usually want something modest. I didn't like my nose since I've been 14, and now I want to fix it. I'm tired of my lower eyelids looking tired. My neck doesn't look like me anymore. I just had a patient who's young, like late 20s, just got really hollow under eyes. And she just wants to have that be less hollow so she looks less tired. It's common. So in terms of making the case for plastic surgery, it's not necessary for happiness. Clearly isn't. It's definitely not a substitute for self-worth. Nobody needs aesthetic plastic surgery. But our bodies affect our minds, and our minds affect how we experience our bodies, and they go back and forth. And furthermore, we interact with others, and others interact with us, like we talked about before. These responses influence how we experience ourselves, and the relationship is pretty complicated and multi-directional. So not just as simple as like, oh, this person's vain, they're ridiculous, it misses a huge part of human experience. So for the right person with realistic expectations, for the right reasons, changing something on the outside, it can be actually a really healthy way to address things going on the inside. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Love to hear what you think in the comments. Leave me a comment and let me know. Take care.